Hey everybody, thank you so much for paying attention and listening to another one of my podcasts. I say paying attention because I think it's really important that we not only pay attention to what our elected officials are doing, but watch what's going on in the state. And that's why with me today is the Agriculture Commissioner.
How are you?
Nice
Good to see you
meet
again. It's all good?
Oh gosh, it's going great. Mike Strain, I appreciate you coming on with me again.
Absolutely. Well, it's a great time of the year. Have you had some Washington Parish watermelons yet? Have you had any watermelons?
I have not had any of those watermelons.
Look, now they're out there. I saw several trailer loads this morning, pickup trucks. You've got to get some Louisiana melons, whether they're Washington Parish, Tangipahoa, Farmerville, or Plaquemines Parish. Right now, they're really, really, really great. We've had excellent weather. And look, you chill them down. Look, there's nothing better for you. Very healthy, very nutritious, and low in calories.
I've heard, do they have the little opening where you can put stuff in those watermelons too? Are they better that way?
Well, no. Well, at this point in my life, I just like when
You just like the watermelon the way it is.
Right.
I love that. I love that.
Yes, it is.
I thought a little joke might be good
But you can make watermelon teas. Chef Celeste Gill, she taught me how to make watermelon tea.
Now that I've never had.
Oh, it's wonderful. So you brew your tea and you put slices of watermelon and watermelon juice in there. It's really, boy, it brings out a lot of flavor and natural sweetness.
I'm gonna have to get that recipe from you.
Yes. Well, there's no real recipe. You just kind of do it to taste. You go ahead and brew your tea. You add your watermelon slices and you get some watermelon juice and you put in there till it's sweet to taste, and it's just incredible.
I love. We forget here in Louisiana sometimes how wonderful that our farms are and how wonderful the foods are that we grow down here. You're saying watermelon, but we also have sweet potatoes.
Oh, and sweet potatoes are just tremendous. And so if you look at everything that we have, and again, we buy fresh, we buy local. Our sweet potatoes are incredible. Our local pecans, delicious and buttery.
Oh, yeah.
And what about those Creole tomatoes? And I can tell you, for Sunday, I cook Sunday for Mother every Sunday. So I bake chicken with fresh okra and fresh tomatoes and some onions out of the garden. It was incredible, but fresh. And so these Creole tomatoes right now, they are. This is the time, when local corn on the cob, and the okra is very, very plentiful. Now it's time to get that stuff out of the garden and cook it up. And of course, people ask me, what is your recipe? I said, what do you mean recipe? I just start cooking, right?
Well, I always growing late. I actually planted late this year.
That's okay.
And I went on to the Department of Agriculture and I said, how late can I plant my sweet potatoes? Because I used to plant sweet potatoes in my backyard.
Yes.
And, the Louisiana Beauregard sweet potatoes. Yeah, the Beauregards.
Yes.
And for years I did that, and I haven't done it in a few years. But I forget how great our environment is and how strong our sweet potato crops are down here. I literally would just get some of the kiddie pools that are about that tall and about 6 feet in diameter. I fill them up with dirt. I buy some Beauregard slips, and then I plant that every spring. And then amazingly enough, I just turn the dirt and new shoots grow up every spring after a winter.
That's right. And I tell people, if you have a yard and you've got, if you got places you need to fill here, they're low here. So look, that's where you plant your garden that year. So go ahead and you can do multiple things, and you can either build, you can use the kiddie pools, or you can go down to your big box store or your local feed and seed, and now they have these metal rims. They're like rims.
Yeah.
Put it there, put your pot and soil in, and grow everything. And when the season's over, pull it up, smooth it out, and if you've got another low area in your yard, well, then guess what? That's where you plant next time. The area. That's right.
I do everything in pots, so it's up off the ground.
Well, that's good too, and that works very, very well. If you don't have a place for a garden, grow it in pots, especially your tomatoes. You can do that. A squash plant, a few okra plants, and just a few plants will produce a lot. Especially if you're growing those little cherry tomatoes or the Creole tomatoes, and it's a lot of fun. Now, what I used to do, because I was, really a purist, and we farmed in Lower Plaquemines Parish, so I would take our what we call our lick tubs, in other words, the tubs that the liquid feed for the cattle would come in, and they're real nice, heavy duty, and I would put soil from our farm and Plaquemines Parish.
Oh, the tubs, I bet
that's right, and then bring them with me to my house.
I grow in those, yeah.
Yes, and then I would plant my tomato plants in there and use rainwater, that would come in, and just fantastic tomatoes. And then of course, when I'd run out, I'd stop by the Becknells and get a few boxes of tomatoes as well.
Well, the low areas, I like to keep the low areas low, because I find that if you keep the low areas low, you get crawfish.
Well, that must be really low.
No, I'm just kidding. But I also want to talk to you. Get everybody updated on the Department of Agriculture. You do a lot of talks, a lot of interviews, but I always find there's a lot of people who simply just don't know.
Well, the Department of Ag and Forestry is a very large agency. I'm one of the constitutional officers of the state. And under the Constitution, it says the commissioner shall exercise all functions of the state for the promotion, the protection, and advancement of agriculture and forestry. But there are many different things under my jurisdiction, many offices of. And so we have 26 boards, commissions, and authorities, and we regulate almost everything in commerce. So I'm the commissioner of what you think of traditional agriculture, right?
Okay.
As we say, cows and plows, right?
I like
Corn
that.
and beans, right? Cotton, rice, all of that. The commissioner of forestry, the Office of Forestry. We have 18.6 million acres of timber. We have 8.6 million acres of crops.
How many acres is Louisiana?
It's about 27.8 total million acres. So 85% of all Louisiana is in ag, forestry, and aquaculture. 85%
owned by the
of the
state?
land mass. No, sir. No. Mostly by private owners.
Okay.
Louisiana, most of the land is owned privately. Whereas in other states, if you get out into, say, the Dakotas, right, less than 10% of the state is owned privately. The rest is owned by the state and federal government. And so here, most of the state is actually private. And if you look at our timber owners, about 10% of all the timber is owned by the government, mostly the federal government in the Comanche. 10% is owned by the large land companies, your Royal Martins, those big land companies.
Right.
But the rest is owned by smaller, 10,000 individuals. And so if you look, we have over 24,000 farms in Louisiana.
But 85% of that is agriculture.
Well, the majority of the entirety of the state is in ag, forestry, and aquaculture. Yes, that's why it's the largest industry in the state. And so when you talk about the value, of agriculture, and Dr. Lawrence Scott and I are friends, but we always say, he'll tell me, no, oil and gas is the largest industry. I said, no, it's agriculture. So it depends on how you look at the statistics. Right? But if you look at what we grow directly, direct growth of agriculture and forestry is over $13 billion. But if you look at what we handled here, so 63% of the nation's grain that is exported comes right down this Mississippi River and is exported. So every week at this table, we're working with new entities, new grain elevators, new export facilities all over the state, because more of that is coming. The world needs America's products, and the work we've done on the Mississippi River by doing the dredging and building infrastructure and building those export facilities and rail, barge, truck, that share is going to grow. And so when you look at that, our total ag exports from the United States will be in and around $191 billion. Of the grain, right at 65% of that grain is coming down and moves from here. If you look at our export facilities for poultry, we have the largest, frozen export facility in the hemisphere, and that's in New Orleans cold storage.
So not only is Louisiana producing all this, does the department? You're saying that the Department of Agriculture handles what's coming down the river?
We work with the other states. So I'm responsible for the inland grain elevators. The federal government is responsible for the federal export grain elevators. So we have our grain traders and our grain inspectors that work at the inland elevators, and we work in concert with the federal government to make sure all of that flows on a continuum. So if you think about grain, when they go between the field and the ship, it's inspected multiple times. So if it goes onto a state grain elevator, which is the inland elevators, then the state grain inspectors inspect it, and by that, then the elevator knows what the grade of the grain is, and that's how they base their price. And then from there, if it's shipped to go by rail or by ship, then there's a federal inspection that takes place, and it sets those standards as well as it goes into foreign commerce.
All of this
is in constant motion.
Constant motion, but all of this comes through the Louisiana Department of Agriculture at some point.
Yes, in concert with the federal. So we work hand in hand with the USDA.
Right.
And the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. We work hand in hand with the EPA. In fact, that the entire pesticide program. So I'm the commissioner of the Office of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences. So all of the restricted use chemicals are regulated through this agency, right? Working with the EPA, because that's how that authority flows from the EPA through I as commissioner in the person of to the agency. And that's how, if you think about the person that comes out and does your pest control in your home, the termite spray, the aerial applicators that work in the farms, the aerial applicators that spray for mosquitoes, any type of fumigation that is on, say, on timber or going on ships, whatever that is regulated by this agency, and that is a multi-billion-dollar industry, is using all of those restricted use chemicals.
So basically, when they're spraying in, say, Jefferson Parish for mosquitoes,
that comes under our jurisdiction.
Comes out of your jurisdiction.
Yes, that's
This
correct.
is amazing. And I'm going to say this kind of in a way that I'm not unaware, but I don't think how many people are aware.
Most people are not, because it says Department of Ag and Forestry. So
what y'all grow in forests and trees, that's it.
That's
but
right.
it's more than that.
So if you look at, and again, agriculture and environmental sciences, that is a very it's a very big agency. And so there, if you talk about everything to do with horticulture, everything from arborists, to landscape irrigators, the floral industry, everything, all the plant industry, and just in that part of the agency alone, we have 24,000 licensees.
Yeah,
24,000 licensees, and so anyone that handles chemicals, right, they have to be tested, licensed, and accredited. We oversee that, and so that's through the Advisory Commission on Pesticides, as well as the Structural Pest Control Commission and the Horticulture Commission, and those are three different ones. I'm the Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So what that does, that oversees the Office of Metrology, not meteorology, metrology.
The flow
weights,
of water,
measures, and standards. What is a pound? What is a gallon of gasoline? Right?
Right.
So you go to the service station, most people see that sticker with my name and a phone number on it, right? So we make sure you get a gallon, and it's gasoline, and it meets the national standards. For octane, make sure it doesn't have water in it, but to make sure it's gasoline. If you buy a quart of oil, it's got to be a quart, and it's got to be oil. If you buy a pound of frozen shrimp, it's a pound of frozen shrimp.
Right.
The label's got to be correct, and you're getting what you pay for. And so
you get Louisiana shrimp if it's marked Louisiana shrimp,
right? If it says
right?
Louisiana, it's going to be Louisiana, certified Louisiana. Yeah. And so when you look at all those consumer services, and that's also where the Commodity Commission resides. They oversee all the elevators, because on an inland elevator, we oversee their operations. At the end of the day, to make sure when that farmer delivers the grain, that farmer is paid. So if you think about just on the grain side, between $4 and $6 billion right there, $1 billion, we have to make sure those grain elevators remain solvent, and that everybody gets paid. Because if a grain elevator becomes insolvent under the law, I must take it over in receivership, run it, pay everybody, then try to collect whatever we can collect back, and the farmers pay into a fund to help ensure that we have enough cash flow to do that, grain and cotton indemnity fund. And so that's a very big part of what we do, and we oversee all of these grain elevators, on the state grain elevators. And so that agency stays extraordinarily busy. If you think about just in weights, measures, and standards, we oversee more than 135 to 150,000 measuring devices a year. Every scale, every scanner, right? Every scanner, every scale, every pump, no matter what it's pumping, right? And that, so that keeps us busy there. Animal health and food safety. Animal health, diseases of the animal kingdom, right? And food safety, and that is a big part of that agency. And so there's where we have the livestock enforcement officers, right? Your brand officers as well. But we also oversee the livestock markets. We oversee all the trade that's going on there. We're also responsible for all the diseases in the animal kingdom to make sure they never get to the human world.
So do you, especially like some of the things that are coming out in public today.
Like the monkeypox, we're very, very aware of that. Now, I work hand in hand, with, the Department of Health and Hospitals here. We work hand in hand. We have many years, because we are, trained, and I'm trained personally as a veterinarian in public health. And so we work with them. I also work with the United States Department of Health and Human Services.
How much do you all have to work with the wildlife and fisheries?
We work a lot with wildlife and fisheries because we overlap in a lot of ways. And so, there's a general rule. If it is saltwater, sport fish, brackish, that's wildlife and fisheries. If it's inland, non-sport, and if it's raised commercially, then it's me. Then on crawfish, I got the pond-raised crawfish, and they oversee the wild caught. But we work together on many things on a continual basis, like deer, the deer pens. And we have more than 300 of those. That falls under me, because those are livestock. the wild deer, or
Even
the
privately
wildlife and
owned
fish,
ones?
privately owned, fall under the jurisdiction of the Department of Ag and Forestry. That's correct. We license and regulate and oversee that as well.
Because I knew somebody at one time that had a couple hundred acres of a high, the 12, the
High fence, they call it.
fence.
So that would fall
type
under the
stuff.
Department of Ag and Forestry.
Now we've
Yes.
talked about percentages of how much of Louisiana is privately owned and how much of it is agriculture. How much money do you think comes through, or how much in dollar wise is the Department of Agriculture responsible for when you add up, forestry?
More than $100 billion in the economy. So by the time we buy, if you look at just fuel, well, that's right at $4 billion, just gasoline and diesel. If you look at the ag and forestry, that's $13.6 billion. And that doesn't go into everything as it multiplies. I'm talking about direct. So
Right.
we look at everything that we touch, every scale, everything that is scanned, every bit of commerce falls under the agency. So, reasonably about $100 billion at least plus in our economy.
This is
that we
really
have
interesting.
we touch in one way or the other.
This is really interesting in this respect. Whenever you hear about people who, when elections are coming up, and you hear about everybody go, I'm going to run for this or run for that. I don't think people realize the complexity of the Department of Agriculture and what's involved in it. And
It is very complex, and if you look at, we tend to stay in office quite a while. It's there's a lot of knowledge base that has to go into running this agency. I'm the 7th Commissioner of Agriculture in Louisiana history, number 7.
So of that chain of succession, so to speak, who had the wisdom, years ago, and I'm sure if this wisdom was not there, you would have come up with it, because I appreciate how smart you are in all this. Every time you talk with me, I'm amazed at your information. But who had the wisdom years ago to say, okay, pesticides used are going to fall under the Department of Agriculture, weights and measures are going to fall in here? Who had the wisdom to say, hey, this is all really connected?
A lot of that really grew after the Constitution Convention of 1974. So between 74 and around 83, a lot of things started moving, and a number of agencies were moved from the governor's office to the Department of Ag and Forestry between 83 and 85, I think.
Does the legislature decide that?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, yes, the legislature does. And so, but there are a lot of natural fits, because a lot of what we do, we work with our federal partners in hand in hand.
Right.
Whether it's food safety under FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act, or whether, you see, if we don't follow the federal guidelines on restricted use chemicals, then the federal government will then, under the FIFRA laws and others, the states will lose their ability to do that, and then you'll have federal people doing what state people do. And of course, that's a whole different ball of wax.
I love my 10th Amendment. I love our 10th Amendment rights, yeah.
So yes, and so a lot of that, but from time to time, the legislature keeps sending us more things to do, and that's fine, as long as you don't send us too many unfunded mandates.
But all politics are local, so it's better that we have a local person, that's talking to the farmers, talking with the growers, talking with people.
Like I say, you always
want
wanted an elected official on the other side of that desk answering that phone every day.
Yeah.
Right, working the problems. Continuing to work the problems.
And I love how you do
we have
that.
a good crew. We really do.
Well, speaking of the legislature, what legislation did you have in this last session? If we do maybe a little mini legislative wrap up when it pertains to the
We
Department of
normally
Agriculture.
have on average 10 to 15 bills per session. So in the last 15 years, we've passed more than 100 pieces of legislation working together with our legislators. And so I have to have legislative sponsors. But this year, there were a number of key provisions. One is that we went into the Office of Soil and Water Conservation. So I'm also the Commissioner of Soil and Water Conservation.
Right.
We have 44 district offices there. And that brings down more than $100 million federal dollars per year to match with the farmers' money for soil and water conservation. But we looked at changing some of the definitions in soil and water conservation, adding the term soil health. So soil is not dirt. As we say, dirt's what's under your fingernails.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Soil is what's growing, what's out there, and it's live.
Right.
So in order to capture federal and other dollars that are coming in as we increase soil health, that means by doing that, we make it more productive. It increases the organic matter. It increases the carbon capture. It decreases the amount of moisture and other nutrients that are lost. But we had to go into the law and specifically add that language. There was another provision where the law mandated that I double collect for the farmers for the soybean assessment. So there's an assessment on soybeans, and there's a federal assessment, and then there's a state assessment. But if you collect the federal assessment, then you get a credit against your state assessment, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the federal assessment was significantly more than the state assessment, but it said we had to collect both. And so those are some of the technical things that we go in, and correct. We also look at just...
in other words, you're fighting for the farmers on that one.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, and we wasn't going to collect both,
right?
But it was a very complex mechanism to collect both and then reimburse and credit against the other. I mean, it's just kind of crazy. And so, we had a number of specific pieces of legislation, but most of it is just streamlining and modernizing, the agency and getting things that we need moving forward. But also, we did come out pretty well. We got some money to replace some of the bulldozers. The bulldozers that we're replacing. As the commissioner of the Office of Forestry, I'm the state's primary firefighter. And so we have 90...
Y'all do firefighting too?
Yes, indeed. That is a big deal. We have 97 firefighting units, and we have 7 large units, federal firefighting units, the big 750s. We have 650 dozers on Mack trucks, 97 of them. But a number of them were bought in 2002. So they're 20 years old now.
Right.
And they're getting to the point where they're just worn out. So we were able to get enough money. We're going to have some state money. We're going to match it with some federal money and get 22 new units. And then we're going to try to do that each year until we can replace the fleet. And because you think about it, if a bulldozer on a construction job breaks down, well, you get out and go and walk and call a mechanic. But if you're in a fire, fighting a fire, and it breaks down, well, you're in a heap of trouble. Right? Yeah.
Well, what I like hearing that's one of the things you're talking about is that you really know how to connect our legislature with the federal government, and you do it the right way.
Well, I served in the legislature for 2 terms.
Right.
Prior to becoming commissioner. So, yeah, I come from that there.
Well, I like the fact that not only the experience, but I like the fact that you see the overall picture, and you really know how to go through the process correctly and connect everything in the right way.
So you got to reach up and you got to reach across, right? And you got to bring everybody together to get the job done, because we're working. It's a constant, working. For instance, that we get federal grants, but oftentimes they have to have a state match, or you have to have spending authority from the state legislature to be able to draw down the federal grant to use it. So it's a constant dance, but we're all going, in the same direction.
And you mentioned soil earlier. Do you all have anything to do with coastal erosion?
We do. We do serve on those commissions for coastal erosion, and a big part of what we're looking at now, especially, there's the outdoor conservation program that's coming, through the legislature, but the Office of Soil and Water Conservation, it's got a big part on decreasing runoff, decreasing phosphorus runoff, loss of nitrogen, loss of soil, and so all of that works together. And so we do work hand in hand with the CPRA, with the governor's office on that. And so again, it's a partnership that we work on.
Right.
Yes.
Well, that's good to hear, because I think, when you look at the map, like I think when you look at Louisiana, it's still shaped like it was 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. But then when you actually start looking at satellite views of it today,
you look at the erosion
you realize,
in the last 100 years.
Yeah,
it is rapidly accelerating.
And
as a matter of fact, there's some articles in the last few days talking about how far the inland marshes will be freshwater marsh versus saltwater marsh in the next 50 years. And so the rate of loss of erosion, and loss of our coastline is real. And it's a big, big concern to everyone. Before I was a legislator, I served on the Coastal Erosion and Loss Committee with the Farm Bureau, and that's going back, almost 30 years. And we were on Holly Beach, and the gentleman there told us one day, said, look, we don't do something, this ain't going to be here no more. Guess what?
It's not there
anymore. Right? And what a lot of people don't quite realize is that on the coast there's what's called cheniers, ridges.
Right.
Ridges. And so you lose that ridge when it's gone, and then it rapidly runs, for miles and miles and miles until it hits the next ridge.
I didn't realize that.
Yes, sir.
About the cheniers. That's a walk away today.
Yes. Because that's where at one time that was the banks of a river, the cheniers, the rims.
And it's one of those situations, like I could go through a whole list of ideological narrative type stuff that people fight over in our country and our state. But this is one of those things that we got to stop fighting over, because everybody has a different idea.
Well,
and everybody's fighting over it. And
Louisiana, our wetlands loss is the greatest of any state in the nation. This is America's wetlands. Mm-hmm. We dug the canals on our coast first for the fur industry, okay, and then for oil and gas, and then for shipping, right? And so, but we collectively, that has benefited the entirety of the United States. Well, collectively, we have to fix that problem. And it is $100 billion problem, not a $1 billion problem. It's $100 billion problem. And we have got to correct that. And so it's amazing. There was an article I read that they pulled out of a National Geographic, 1885. And when they were first starting to build the big levees, the first levee said, they're going to levee the Mississippi River. And someone said, yeah, but it's going to cause loss of the coast of Louisiana. I said, yeah, but by the time that happens, they'll know how to fix it.
They said that in 1885.
Yes, because they knew when you took that river, and instead of allowing it to cross over the Macon Ridge,
exactly,
or to come down Old River and flow, right?
Yeah.
Flow like it
always depositing soil.
That's right. And now they levied it up, and it shoots it straight out, and it goes out into a trench, out in the Gulf of Mexico.
It's filled up the Gulf of Mexico now.
And it creates those eddies that have shaved away our coast. They knew then that we would be where we are today. And of course, we're not going to take the levees down.
Right.
That's not going to happen. But we've got to figure out a way to stop the erosion and rebuild the wetlands. And we're going to have to run more water down Old River. We're going to have to figure out a way to run and build retention ponds all the way from the Mississippi line to the Texas line and let that water down. We've got to figure that out because the continued loss of the coast is real.
It's almost like having a pipe that just brings dirt in there.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always said, is there a way to maybe partner up with the oil companies and make them partners in the process and let them help?
But the other thing is that the Mississippi River used to be known as the Big Muddy. We have armed the banks, putting concrete up in the curves. Everyone in the Midwest is conserving their soil because the soil releases phosphorus that comes down the river that goes into the dead zone. So everyone up and down the river is doing everything they can so that the Big Muddy isn't as muddy. So the sediment is less now, and it's getting less every year, so there's less to deposit to continue to rebuild the wetlands. So we have changed that ecosystem.
Unbelievable! I had no idea that of having less mud. I knew that the mud used to be a huge deposit. How much mud?
What's a big thing? You're all up through the Midwest. Conserve your soil. Don't lose your soil, because the soil is what carries a lot of the phosphorus that gets in the river that results in the dead zone as well.
I do have a few more questions. I could talk to you for hours, and hopefully we'll talk for a little bit more here. But knowing some of these concerns that the state has, not just with the wetlands and not just our coast, is there anything that you're working on for next legislative session already?
Well, what we're doing now is that next legislative session is a fiscal session. So next legislative session, we will be trying to get more money to replace some more of the bulldozers. So what we do is that in between sessions, we begin scouring the law and the rules and work to see what we're going to need to bring forth, because everything's always changing. Everything is always in motion. So the things that we have to do is work on more infrastructure, more truck routes, more rail, and more, ways to get barges down so that we can more efficiently move our products, and also look at a number of things such as from the farm to the first point, whether it's a grain elevator or to the ships, things that we can do to increase our ability to be competitive in the container market. We'll be doing with that. So right now we're starting to study. We're taking off on all the notes, looking where we need to be, and then generally about January and February we'll start working with our legislators on bills for next year. It's a continuum.
Well, they always say the cream rises to the top, but in this case, the important bills rise to the top. So you work on all the year and find out the ones that are most important.
That's right, and I try not to file more. Really, 15 is like my cutoff. I don't want more than 15 bills in the legislative session, especially a fiscal session. Because remember, each legislator can only have 5 general bills.
Right.
And it's short. They only meet 45 days in a 60-day window. And to get legislation from beginning to the end in 45 days
is tough.
It's tough, and especially if you have a large package. And so we will look and we will see what bills, we get in here and we'll go through them. So each of my assistant commissioners, my chief lieutenants, their responsibility will be to read the law, with a highlighter,
right.
Something that we need to change or to look at or to modernize, then bring that forth. And then in the meantime, I give another, for instance, something we've been working on now for more than a year, is that the new charging stations for electric vehicles.
You're going to be charging that too?
Well,
no pun intended.
Well, Well, I'm the Commissioner of Weights, Measures, and Standards. However, I do not measure electricity. But on all these charging devices, there is no one making sure that the consumer is being accurately charged. So the charging stations, there's a meter that's feeding them, but you put your credit card in and then you're charging the vehicles. So several things. One, there's no road tax on that. So I don't know, but that's for Department of Revenue. But also, we want to make sure, and we're in open discussions with the Public Service Commission, and either they will do it or we will do it. But we're the ones at the service stations. And so in other states, the offices of Weights and Measures are now implementing a way to license, tag, and check them. Just check them.
Right.
Just to make sure that you're getting, the kilowatts you're paying for.
Right.
So that's something we will be discussing next session, and that'll be an ongoing discussion as this is a new industry.
So do you think the legislature is going to charge you with that responsibility?
Well, we don't know.
Pun intended.
Yeah, I got it. So we don't know.
Right.
We just want to make sure that the consumer, at the end of the day, is protected and somebody's checking up. That's all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So then you said something a few minutes ago that I wanted to ask about when you talked about the infrastructure to get things from the farms to the brokers, from the rivers, back and forth. So in that respect, you are also in charge of some roads and bridges.
Well, no. Well, we're not in charge of the roads and bridges, but we work with DOTD on that.
Okay.
And so some of the things I give you, for instance, in many cases, to get things from point A to point B at the ports, they have to short load containers. The containers can't be completely full because they would hit the weight limits. So we've got to work on getting specific routes that they can go down so that they can be properly loaded so they're not inefficient, right? So that's one thing. And then also looking at how we can move more product safely on the roads and how do we redesign whatever we're going to do. If you look at cane trailers, they have extra axles. So if you look at the things we're trying to do, because a new discussion is to be able to sell a container load of corn or beans from the farm directly to its end user, whatever part of the world it is.
Right.
I mean, you can do that now with dry goods. But with the farmers, they could load on the farm and direct sell now. And so another method of moving product is that having small-scale container ships that go upriver. And they will load the container that will come in, on a truck from a farm.
Right.
And then onto that ship. And from there, it will go to wherever. Then the end user opens it up when he gets it there. And so that's a whole new method of understanding what's going on, how to do that.
Well, that method of understanding pertains to being able to help small farmers in Louisiana, large farmers in Louisiana get their product someplace as quick as possible, helps them get their money quick, it helps them sell more product.
All those direct sales.
So I do have a few big questions. I got some of my good ones. What is the biggest threat to Louisiana's agriculture?
I think the biggest threat to Louisiana agriculture is overall complacency. And I say that is that people now are about 5 to 6 generations removed from the farm, and immediately when you see us hit a national crisis, whether it's COVID, or whether it is a issue with the economy, recession, then immediately America refocuses it. Look, milk, chicken, fuel, right? But by complacency, we don't pay attention to everything that we do that could have a negative impact on the ability of the farmer to produce. A farm is not like a light switch. You just don't turn it on and off. It takes a lot. There's a lot involved in the farms. And so what we have to do, as politically is, one, don't get in the farmer's way. And then two, don't impair them by 1,000 little nicks. And so we have to make sure that we understand that produce on the farm, they're going to have trucks, they're going to have tractors, they got to have chickens, they got to have pigs, they got to have cows. Right? There are a lot of things associated with it. They got to have sugar cane, right? We got to burn the cane. We got to do all these things. And so the ones that, that there's a certain amount of things that go along with that. And we have to protect that. And I think the greatest threat to agriculture is that when you think, when you think that food comes from the Grubhub driver that delivers it, you don't realize how far up that chain and every aspect of that chain. And so that's a big threat. The second problem is that right now the cost of energy and the cost of all inputs and the cost of fertilizer, which comes mostly from natural gas, and the lack of availability of potash. We we produce less than 1% of the world's potash in the United States. We only produce 10% of what we use. We've got to find more sources of potash in the United States because Russia, Belarus, and China control 43% of the potash market, and Canada is 29% of the potash market. So if you look at that, and you have to have potash, you've got to have potash to raise crops. That's you talk about nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, but you've got to have the potash.
What exactly is potash? It's fertilizer, right?
It's a mineral, okay, right? And it's high in potassium, right? It brings in your potassium and your phosphorus. The nitrogen, most of the nitrogen we get is from form ammonium nitrate, which is from natural gas. But you've got to have the potash because if not, agriculture as we know it, that you will not have that production.
They mix it in the soil, I guess.
Mix it in the soil. Well, what happens, the way it's done, every crop is different. Based on what your nutrient load is, you will fertilize exactly the right amount at exactly the right time. Because it's it costs a lot of money to fertilize.
Right.
But without that fertilizer, you don't have that production. And so we've got to find more sources of that. But we got to get energy cost down because that is one of the leader drivers for everything else the farmer touches. So for the farmer, looking at the commodity prices, and you saw they have dropped dramatically in the last 10 days because of the fears of a global recession. Mm. But the input cost didn't drop.
Right. So
because they're already in the ground. And now we're looking at what the farmer's going to get when he brings his grain to the elevator, the grain and the other products they haven't already pre-sold by contract. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, that farmer's got to make a profit.
Right.
If you want him back next year. And so you've seen the predictions, the big predictions by the United Nations and more coming out today. They're very concerned next year and the year after about, worldwide food shortages, worldwide. Now here in the United States, we're not going to run out of food. It's going to cost you more, and there's nothing we can do about that right now until we can get the input cost. And I think at the end of the day, if we can get our input cost down, you will see some decline in cost, but then we'll reach a plateau. The main thing is to control inflation for that point. So inflation is a big, big, big worry of our farmers, because again, they are price takers. They're not price makers. And they got to put everything into a crop long before they ever sell their crop.
So you've touched on a couple of things. I'm going to reach back for a second and then come back here. I notice how you're always concerned about what the farmers are having to pay and the cost of the farmer. And I appreciate that you always look out for the little guy. And I also appreciate that when you talked about the assessments earlier, I've talked with assessors around the state a little bit, and I appreciate whenever I hear that someone who has a millage that they don't always assess the full millage, or they don't assess the full assessment on the little guy. And I appreciate that you didn't, when the federal government was assessing more, you chose, I guess in a way, strategic to help out people by not charging the full assessment.
Well, to eliminate the state assessment when there's a federal assessment.
Right.
They shouldn't be paying both. But those are assessments, that's research and promotion. Most of the crops, the farmers voluntarily put up money for research and promotion. So if you look at the Rice Research Station here, the H. Rouse Cafe, LSU Ag Center, the preeminent rice research station in the world, that is funded predominantly by the farmers. They put up, 3-4 cents a hundredweight of every hundredweight of rice they produce, and that goes for do that research. If you look at, our grain farmers, they put up money going into the research. Our sweet potato farmers, our sugarcane farmers, all of our farmers, by and large, put up dollars. They go to the research centers, and most of that is voluntarily done through a voluntary assessment. And so when you start talking about the miracle of agriculture and all the technology, all the science, it benefits the farmers. It sure does, but it benefits every consumer in this country.
And now that I went back a little bit, I'm bringing this all together here because one of the big questions is that you maybe think of when you said, that the farmers can't make money, they're not coming back next year, and something that we're seeing around the country, not just in Louisiana, and you've brought this up before when I've seen you talk, is that farmers are getting out of the business because they can't make money at it, and they're selling their land.
Yeah, and they're also aging out.
And aging out.
Most farmers are our age. And so, if the average age of the American farmer is getting around between 65 and 68 years of age. And when they sell the farm, well, that's quite a few dollars there.
And who are they selling the farms to?
Well, most of the time they try to sell them or either pass them down to the children or to a next of kin or to a neighbor. But now when they come on the markets, a lot of the farms are going to sale, and the large real estate investment companies, the REITs, are buying them up.
And we don't know
Especially
who
the
owns
big
those
ones.
REITs.
You don't know. That's another question, and that's something the federal government and a lot of other people are very concerned about, is that who actually owns the corporations that are buying the land. Now, we do know, and there's a report that, a congressional report that has recently been published, and that was in the last quarter of last year, foreign ownership of agricultural land. We estimate that by the close of 2020, about 37.9 million acres, which is a little under 3%, 3 to 4% of America's farmland is foreign owned. Most of that is owned by the Canadians.
So 3% of our farmland is owned by foreign countries.
That's correct.
And Canada, who would be second and third?
I think if you look at Canada, I would say probably Canada, maybe Mexico, but there's a lot European, Dutch, a lot of that, and so there's a whole laundry list. China is at the bottom, though. They're at about 3% of the foreign-owned land in America that we know of is owned by China. They're more interested in the agribusinesses, Smithfield, Hams, and others. They're more interested in buying the businesses than the farmland. But most of the farmland is, again, by the Canadians. But we're trying to drill down on these corporations to see actually who owns the corporations.
So not only is that a bad thing, having foreign countries controlling our food, or not only where we grow our food, our supply chain.
Supply chain. That's the key issue, right?
Right.
Because they would do things that would benefit their countries, and so that is a very big concern.
And make
of
our
all
food
of
prices
America.
go even higher.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So is there anything that the Department of Agriculture can do, or the Louisiana legislature can do, to help farmers keep Louisiana land in Louisiana
Well,
hands?
some of the things that we need to look at is to make sure that we do not hit them with very high capital gains or inheritance taxes when they sell that land on to their children. The same way, with federal taxes as well. So we have to protect that because inheritance tax and you've heard the discussions in the last 2 years that first, the inheritance, and this is being discussed federally, you'd have to pay capital gains tax from the time when your father bought it to the time it went to you, then inheritance tax on the balance. And Texas A&M did a study, said for the average American farm, that tax would amount to over $725,000. They can't pay it.
Yeah, nobody has that kind of
Nobody
money.
has that kind of cash to pay it. So if you don't, we will lose the American farm really in one generation. And then we're going to be at the mercy of multinational corporations.
That own America.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So we have to protect that. And so we have to have the available credit, but we also cannot tax our farmers out of existence. Because at the end of the day, who's going to pay that tax? Everybody that goes to the grocery store to buy food.
And it's especially with the price increases when foreign countries own our food supply or our supply chain. So it's almost like not only Louisiana legislators, but Louisiana legislators wake up, but the legislators all over the United States need to say, look, you guys are feeding us. We're going to give you a tax break.
The USDA is very, very aware of this. There was a report that from the congressional offices to the USDA. USDA has just published a report on foreign ownership of ag land, and we've really got to get a handle on that. We need to put some limitations on that, but we also have to make sure that we don't set up a system where the American farmer can't keep his land and pass it on to future generations.
Right.
Because everything the farmer makes, they put it back in the farm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like our farmers need to be able to pass their land on to generations tax-free.
Well, and the other thing that we need to do is that have the ability to take prime farmland and a way to buy out the development rights and return it stays in farmland in perpetuity.
Right.
Because they're not making any more.
Right.
They're not making any. So if there's an option, then that farmland needs to stay in agriculture.
Exactly.
Right now we've got enough land. But worldwide, we don't have enough land.
Right.
And worldwide, the growth in consumption is outpacing the growth in production of food products. Worldwide. And
say that again, because I heard this before.
Worldwide, the growth in consumption is outpacing the growth in production. And in many commodities, we're now consuming more than we're producing. And that is without taking the Ukrainian situation into account. And so over the next 2 years, we will get a much clearer picture of supply and demand and production versus what we have to produce in order to feed the world. And so the United Nations reports are showing that more and more people now across the world are now food insecure. We have to make sure that never happens here in America.
And if we keep letting this happen, letting the political or politics and greed and taxes take over.
And the problem with politics, there are fewer and fewer farmers in politics. Remember what Jefferson said? I said this country will remain virtuous as long as the majority of its elected leaders are farmers.
Did not know that.
That's Thomas Jefferson. He truly believed that. And what I mean by that is that the farmer, we have very few in the legislature, just a handful, and very few in Congress. But the members respect those members, but you've got to have more agricultural people involved, because it's not that the other leaders, they don't worry about the price of food, but they don't understand how you say the long game in agriculture, because
right.
It's simply because they come from a different environment. But it's the long game. That's what we're fighting, the long game. Okay, because agriculture will remain strong in this country unless, again, we destroy it by 1,000 little nicks.
And that's what I was saying. It's people, government gets greedy with tax dollars, and since we don't have enough farmers in government, government's taxing our farmers, not realizing, hey, we're but cutting off our nose to spite our face.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What Ronald Reagan said when he last left office, he said, "Remember this: any government big enough to provide everything you need is by necessity big enough to take everything you've got."
You got two good quotes today, Thomas Jefferson and Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
Well, and I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you might think is necessary for people to realize?
I think everybody's very, very concerned about what's going on in the world. I can tell you that in Louisiana and in America, we are not going to run out of food. Now, other parts of the world, I can't say that. Mm-hmm. But in the United States, we are not. It may, become more expensive, and we're trying to get a handle and slow that down, or to reverse that. But we got to get our input costs down, and we're very, very cognizant of the fact that American families are struggling. And I can tell you, I'm very proud of our farmers and our fishermen, right, and our people in the timber industry. They are working very, very, very hard because they shoulder that responsibility as well.
I love that.
Yep.
I love the fact that you know how to bring it all together, and also give people the confidence, and not just our food source and our Department of Agriculture here, but in what you're doing for our state.
Well, thank you.
I really appreciate that. No, the parting
Come
words.
back.
I will, absolutely. There.
That's right. Yes, parting words. Absolutely. Remember to buy fresh, to buy local, to buy certified Louisiana products. Look for the seal, because it's the real deal.
That's that went through the legislature, didn't it?
Absolutely.
I love it.
Certified Louisiana.
Well, thank you all very much for tuning in, and please, as always, I'd like to say thank you to my sponsors. We got the Parkview Historic Hotel, of course, and Augie's Restaurant down there in New Orleans, in Jefferson Parish, and don't forget about Sequoia Outdoors. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and share this will be on the podcast too. Thank you so much.